If you have any questions or comments about the case, you can email us at nextofkinpodcast@gmail.com. You can also leave us a voicemail for us to play on the show by going to speakpipe.com/nextofkin. If we have enough responses, we'll sit down with Catherine and record a bonus episode discussing your questions and comments. As you might expect, there's a good amount of turnover on the job at the Kentucky State Police, as detectives move roles and departments as the years go by. Jim was murdered 14 years ago, so it's no surprise that the detective who started with the case is no longer on the case today. However, it was surprising to learn that it's been handed off 7 different times since 2008, and we actually got to experience one of those handoffs firsthand.
Yeah, that's probably the case because Detective Briscoe got promoted. He's now Sergeant Briscoe.
Oh, okay.
He's no longer a detective. He's supervisor.
The last detective who had Jim's case was recently promoted in November of this year.
And we have recently heard that Jim's case isn't actually assigned to any one detective now.
As a matter of fact, it has been moved into a pile of other unsolved murders, only to be given attention if the current workload goes dry.
Like we've stated before, Jim's case is cold. No one seems to be working it.
Just like the other 40% of murder cases across the country that are cold or unsolved.
But just because it is becoming almost the norm that unsolved cases are being pushed to the background, that doesn't mean we should accept that. No family should. Sadly, this is more common than not, as across the nation, staff shortages at police departments are causing many cold cases to sit on the back burner. Many police departments are having trouble keeping up with their current workloads, let alone unsolved murders. Many families of cold cases feel abandoned, feeling like they are the only ones left who care about justice for their family members.
This is not what we wanted to find when we started looking into Jim's case.
In fact, we were hoping it was just a misunderstanding or poor communication, and that the good guys were still giving the case attention. At least something. Anything. All Catherine wanted was the occasional update and status. Those requests were usually met with 1 or 2 word responses.
Knowing this is only one side of the story, we reached out repeatedly to the Kentucky State Police, requesting to meet with the detectives on the case, or someone at the post, only to come up empty-handed and left with more questions. We submitted interview requests to the PR department 6 months ago, back in June, but we were met with no response. Not even a denial response from the state police. From this point on, we're going to refer to the Kentucky State Police as KSP, as we will be referencing them quite frequently. We recently called the PR trooper for KSP one last time and asked again about the status of our request from June, but were informed that we needed to submit yet another request. The PR trooper had no recollection of our first submission, even though he was the one we sent the request to.
So we called again and ended up submitting yet another request for an interview.
Kentucky State Police Public Affairs, this is Captain Blanton. It is called, I'm going to email it to you.
Okay.
Film request for something like that. I'd like to email you the film request, and if you could email it back to me, I can send it up for approval. I don't know specifically about the Duckett case. How old is it?
It's from 2008.
Okay.
Having no apparent awareness of the case, a case that has been in the hands of the Post for a decade and a half, felt like a slap in the face to the family. It was almost as if the case never existed, as if Jim never existed. It was as if we were asking for the very first time.
You would think that repeated calls, emails, and form submissions about the same cold case over a period of time would ring a bell to somebody, or at least signify an increased interest. But we were clearly being ignored.
How old is it?
It's from 2008.
Okay, so that helps a lot. With it being that old, it's probably a cold case. They would probably appreciate any kind of publicity that they could get on it. With one like this being 14 years old or so, probably won't be an issue. However, I know that we had one in eastern Kentucky last summer, and they were wanting to do one on a cold case, and they were actually conducting interviews on that cold case, and they were like, we can't right now, but they did make an arrest in it. So don't think it'll be an issue, but let me send you the film request. We'll get it submitted up, and then we'll see what Captain Kidd has to say. Man, sorry it's been so long that somebody didn't get back to you, but getting this sent to you right now, you should have it in the next 15, 20 minutes. You have any issues, give me a call back.
The KSP requires you to submit a form that is called a film request form, even if you're just requesting an interview for an audio podcast. So even though we had already submitted this very request in June, we submitted the request again in November. And then something odd happens. When we hadn't heard anything from our request in November, on December 7th, we called the PR trooper one last time to see if we could get an update on the now 2 film requests that were submitted in June and November. And no one answers, so we leave a voicemail.
Record your message after the tone. When you've finished, you can hang up or press 1 for more options.
Hi, this is Josiah. We talked several weeks ago on the phone about a podcast we're doing, and you had directed me towards a film request form, I believe, and we submitted that. So I was just checking to see if there's any update on that request. I know we had put that request in June before and hadn't heard anything back, so I just wanted to make sure we don't miss any communication on our end. So just giving you a call and checking on the status of that. Thanks so much. But then an hour later, we get a phone call with a voicemail that states that the request has been denied. It's almost as if they completely forgot about the request, yet again, listened to our voicemail and denied it without a discussion with the supposed detective or supervisor on the case.
My name is Sergeant Matt Sudduth for the Kentucky State Police Public Affairs Branch. I've been involved with the film request form in which you, I believe you submitted to us requesting to do maybe an interview or some kind of, we refer to them as a film. It could be a podcast or different things. But anyway, regarding the Jim Duckett or James Duckett case, unfortunately, we have to, at this time, we're going to have to hold off. We're not going to be able to participate in this because the investigation is active at this time. I know it's considered a cold case and that, it is an older case, but as I understand it, they are actively looking into some parts of the investigation of this case at this time, so we're not able to discuss it due to that. But feel free to follow up at a later date or time, and we can revisit it and see if anything's changed, if it's something we might be able to talk about, in a few months or a year from now. So feel free to reach back out at that time. But for now, we are unable to participate in any interviews regarding the Jim Duckett case.
KSB Public Affairs states that the investigation is active at this time, though it's technically considered a cold case. They told us to try again in a few months, or a year. This was beyond frustrating to hear. We hope that they are still looking into Jim's case. We hope that there is a new lead they are following. But we have strong doubts, and so does Catherine. Catherine warned us when we started talking to her that we wouldn't get far talking with the KSP, as they have turned down high-profile TV shows and private investigator groups who were interested in covering Jim's case in one forum or another. The KSP refused to collaborate with these entities at every level. This decision would have been understandable if the case were only a few years old, but it makes very little sense with a case that happened 14 years ago. We want to read our first email to the KSP in its entirety. This was sent in February of this year, via email and an online submission form on their website. This was before our official film request submission in June. This email was never responded to. To whom it may concern. Hello, our names are Josiah and Daniel. We live in Shelbyville, Kentucky, and are currently in production of an upcoming true crime podcast about the murder of Jim Duckett in 2008 here in Shelbyville, Kentucky. We have been conducting audio interviews of family members and friends of Jim's for the podcast, which will be called Next of Kin, The Untold Story of Jim Duckett. We've been working on this podcast as a way to raise awareness about Jim's murder, which is now a 13-year-old case. We are writing to you to request the opportunity to interview anyone we could regarding Jim's case, with anyone who has been involved in this case at any level. We fully respect the work that has been done for this case so far, as we're sure there have been hundreds of hours of work devoted to this case alone. We want the same thing as we're sure you do. We want justice for Jim. We want to see this case solved. One way we can help is through raising awareness. We have been podcasting for over 5 years now and have gained an audience of our own. We are connected in the Shelbyville community where we both live with our families. We love our city and the people in it. Many investigators are hesitant to give interviews or information to podcasters. We understand the hesitation, but we believe we could be an asset to the investigation via the podcast by raising awareness in the community and beyond. If you have any questions for us, please feel free to give us a call or send us an email at your convenience. Thank you for your time. So why go through all these hoops? Why keep trying? Simple. We wanted to believe that someone wanted to help us, to help Catherine, for Jim.
We desired to talk to someone so that we did not impact the integrity of the case for future prosecution, to understand who they have talked to, who they can confidently say is not involved in Jim's murder, to get confirmation that they saw and looked into the same information that we have shared in the first 4 episodes.
The case has supposedly been handed off to its 7th investigator, though we have also heard that no one has actually been assigned this case specifically. A detective can now work this case in between their other cases. This case is clearly cold.
As the trooper stated, you would think that the Post would want more coverage on this case. This case isn't going to get solved unless it gets more eyes and ears on it.
At least they have Jim's case on their website. Or at least they did up until a month ago. Now you get a 404 error not found. Not a single cold case is listed on their website anymore.
A few months ago, you could easily find it. And now it's like it never existed. Was it a simple development error? Or did the case files get moved and archived? The answer is most likely the latter, as we were able to find the case through a lot of website snooping, but no regularly curious person would ever know how to sift through the digital files to find it.
Try it yourself. Go to www.kentuckystatepolice.org. Click on Cases of Interest, then select Post 12. You will be taken to a blank page with no cases. However, there's a search bar. Maybe if you type in Jim's name, the file will come up. Type in Duckett. Try Jim Duckett. The results you get will all be the same. Sorry, but nothing matched your search criteria. Please try again with some different keywords. And it's not just Jim's case that is absent from their website. All unsolved cases from every post, 1 through 16, are completely absent from their Cases of Interest page. So let's assume the KSP just doesn't know how to build a website. Maybe they are just bad at getting back to people and keeping forms on file. DNA evidence has come a long way in 14 years, and we know that Catherine had requested more DNA to be tested back in October of 2019. Catherine reached out to the detective on the case 17 times from October 2019 to today, wanting to know the results of the submitted DNA evidence that, according to the detective, was submitted in November of 2019. Only to get a response of no updates, heard nothing from the lab, all the way to this December with an admission that he had never heard from the lab on the results. 3 years and no results on submitted evidence begs the question, Was it ever really submitted? Did something happen to the DNA sample and no one was willing to admit fault? Cases are solved every day with a rerun of DNA as technology advances, and this case could still be one of them, but someone has to come through. According to the KSP State Lab newsletter published this month, we know that it can take quite a while for things to process. As a matter of fact, turnaround times for toxicology cases involving suspected drug use while operating a motor vehicle, for example, have historically been a problem in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Looking back to 2016, it wasn't surprising for such cases to have an average turnaround time of 6 to 8 months, if not longer. As recently as March of 2020, the average turnaround time for a DUI-D toxicology case was approximately 162 days. Tremendous strides have been made since then to bring the number crashing down to a more reasonable time frame. As of today, the average turnaround time for DUI-D cases in 2022 has been reduced from 162 days to 61.5 days. Jim's DNA profile request is going on over 3 years. That's 1,095 days with no results. One lingering question you may have about Jim's final days are, was he sinking back into his old ways again? Could he have been getting back into binge drinking and back in touch with his own troublesome acquaintances? From everything we heard from all the people we talked to, Jim wasn't going back to his old ways. But of course, people are good at hiding their vices, so it's a fair question to ask. We've seen the autopsy report. They did a toxicology report to see if Jim had any drugs or alcohol in his system at the time of his murder, and he didn't. He was clean. There's not much else that we will talk about in regards to the autopsy report, besides the confirmation that Jim was stabbed multiple times, and that stabbing was in fact the cause of death. We did a deep dive into the autopsy report, but we will leave those details for the police and possible future prosecution team, as we don't want to get in the way of that. Another interesting detail we heard about the investigation is that Jim's girlfriend, who again we're calling Anita, was only talked to by detectives on the Monday that Jim was found, in the back seat of their car, outside of Jim's house. In many murder cases, the significant other is the first person that police will talk to, especially when the victim is stabbed multiple times. But the detectives only spoke with Anita that Monday at Jim's house, in the back seat of a car. They never called her back in for questioning afterwards. A short conversation in a police cruiser is hardly enough time to get the full amount of details from a person close to the victim. Maybe if it was just the initial chat, okay, we can buy that. But to be the only time, there was no eventual trip to the precinct or additional follow-up at the station with Anita. No one showed up at her door or even called her again. That was it. Until 2019, when detectives showed up and asked her to come in for an interview, as they admitted that they never properly interviewed her in 2008. How is it that it takes over 10 years to properly interview the girlfriend of the murdered victim?
And the sheriff was at the door one day, and I answered the door, and he said, "We're looking back into Jim's investigation." He said, "We found out you were never formally interviewed." He said, "Would you be willing to come down to the station and be interviewed?" And I said, "Sure, I have nothing to hide." And that was the first time I'd ever been in one of those rooms and been questioned like that. But it was fine. I mean, it didn't bother me. I had nothing to hide. But that was the first time. And I often wondered, because my brother is an ex-police officer. And even when it happened, he said, "They didn't tell you they needed to formally interview you and ask you questions?" I said, "No." He said, "That's really weird." He said, "I just can't believe they didn't interview you properly and take you into a room and talk to you." I said, "No, they put me in a car and talked to me, and then that was the end of it. Never again." They had to have known who it was at the time, or had somebody somebody as a suspect at the time, or they would have asked you more questions and actually tuck you in, and they never did.
We don't think that Anita had anything to do with Jim's murder. But who else did they not properly interview in 2008? We want to give the Kentucky State Police the benefit of the doubt. But it's getting harder and harder. At every turn, we see things that give us less and less confidence in their ability to solve this case if things stay the same. Just as a refresher, it's been over 3 years since the KSP supposedly submitted DNA evidence, and still states to this day that they never received the results. Catherine called over a month ago to see if she could get an update on the case, but was told the detective on the case had been promoted, and that the new detective would give her a call. She's still waiting on that call. The local newspaper in Shelbyville, the Sentinel News, recently covered the release of this podcast and Jim's case, and they reached out to the KSP for comment. But the KSP couldn't even be bothered to comment on it. And this was just days before the 14-year anniversary date. Lastly, the KSP has denied multiple requests for interviews regarding this case from high-profile TV shows, private investigator groups, to now us. If the Kentucky State Police truly wants justice for Jim, things need to change. People need to hear about this case, and the Kentucky State Police needs to take this case off the back burner and take another look at it. We believe Jim's case is solvable. We just need your help getting their attention. This is an active investigation. Some names have been changed, but the details remain the same. This podcast will withhold certain information critical to the case, so as not to impact the integrity of the investigation being carried out by the Kentucky State Police and other law enforcement agencies.
If you or someone you know have information related to Jim Duckett's murder, please call Kentucky State Police Post 12 at 502-227-2221. Or you can text a tip to 67283 by typing in KSPTIP in the message field. Leave a space and then enter the information that you have regarding the crime. The messages are then sent to a separate service where any identifying information is removed to keep it anonymous. Follow us on social media to keep up to date with information from the podcast and any other details that could come out related to this case.